Recording in progress.
We'll go ahead and start the pre-meeting of the West Jordan Planning Commission, November 1st, 2022. We'd like to excuse Commissioner Trish Hatch and Matt Quinney. So we'll go ahead and get started with our pre-meeting. First on the agenda is our agenda. Any questions about the agenda? Okay. That takes care of the
So, Commissioner Thomas, so I would probably just let Mark launch right into stuff, and then we can just interrupt at 6 and then go into meeting, and then it might get you out of here a little bit quicker because we don't have any training or anything. So that's my suggestion. But you can do whatever you want. You can take a really long break if you want, or you.
I vote that we start earlier. Is that okay, Duncan?
Yeah, that's absolutely okay. Obviously, you just can't officially approve the minutes till your meeting officially starts at 6, but absolutely, you could start with the general plan item right now.
Well, that's the only thing that
Or
really
it's discussion only, so.
needs a vote, so everything else is just a discussion, so. Okay. If I have no other objections, we'll go ahead and start. Mark?
All right. Well, before I get into the general plan, I just wanted to just kind of briefly go over the balanced housing and just kind of give some background on that. We mentioned that in our last meeting, and wanted to kind of go over that for any commissioners that might be new. And so what the balanced housing ordinance is basically it's a check on just proliferation of multifamily developments, essentially. And so what it does is it essentially prohibits any new multifamily developments. And there's a list of many exceptions, but basically it prohibits those until we can reach the ratio that's called for in the ordinance. So what that ratio is a 77% single family and 33% multifamily, or 23, excuse me. But
And what year does that, we anticipate that occurring?
yeah, so the way we do that is we run the numbers every year based on the building permits that we get for the year and just kind of add those to the totals. And when we ran the numbers back in January, looks like we were looking at about 18 years. And that's just judging by the current rate of single family development, which has actually dropped off pretty significantly in the past few months. So that number will probably be higher the next time we run the numbers. But
I know it
yeah.
moves.
Mm-hmm. It does, yeah. It moves with the market, and so. But anyway, yeah. So we'll need a little over 6,400 new single-family dwellings, and that's assuming we don't count any of the multifamily exceptions allowed in that balanced housing ordinance.
So I got one quick question on that one. So that does count against that, even if it's in one of the overlays? It's allowed?
Well, that's kind of, I guess, an interpretation question, but
Scott?
Yeah, I mean, Mark and Larry have run the numbers over the last several years, and they are included. So we're sort of chasing our tail a little bit, and so it's stretching out that time frame. I mean, shoot, what was it, 2013, when we enacted, or the council enacted the cap and grade at the time. What was it, 50 years or some crazy number where we achieved that balance, 55. So it's really, over the last several years, it's compressed. But to Mark's point, single family home building permits have really slowed with the interest rates going up. And Mark, were you going to go over the various exceptions listed in
Yeah.
the ordinance? Okay.
so
Can I ask a question before you move on?
Sure.
I'm a newcomer. Can you tell me what cap and grade means? It sounds like it might be synonymous with balanced housing. Is that
It is.
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, that was kind of a colloquial term, and what it refers to, it's basically capping the number of new multifamily developments where it was at the time the ordinance was passed, and then the grade is more referring to a grading system that it would use once that ratio was reached to determine which developments were, I guess, worthy.
So balanced housing is more politically correct at this point?
That's a fair way to put it, George.
Okay.
And honestly, because we haven't even got to the grade portion of cap and grade, or we won't for a decade plus.
18 years.
Yeah, it seemed more politically correct, and really that's truly the intent of the ordinance is to have a balanced housing ratio, and so it is, I guess it was deemed by by the council to be more politically correct, especially as you go and talk to the state, the legislature, and it helps them understand what our intent is. The cap and grade, they're like, is that some economic thing that you're doing? The cap and trade, or so it's a easier way to explain the intent of the code to people who are not familiar with it, and yeah.
Yeah, and really kind of the intent behind that too, just to add another point, is generally it wasn't necessarily to just ban multifamily citywide. It really was kind of set up to have these exceptions to allow for to really steer multifamily in a direction where it could be approved in places where it was appropriate and could handle, the impacts and things like that. So, like for instance, around a track station. So that's one of the exceptions is development within the TSOD or the Transit Station Overlay District. Others include senior housing. So generally, those tend to have a little bit lower traffic and parking needs. Then some of the others, assisted living
Mark?
centers.
Could I interrupt?
Mhm.
If you could speak to this question kind of on a high, high level as this is influences that are happening within the city. It feels like we have the balanced housing or cap and grade, what was cap and grade. We have that as a force working within our city. But then we have like our the plan that we're working on. What's
General plan.
the general plan that we're working on, where it just talks over and over about how we as a city need to work on and increase access to more multifamily type dwelling units. Could you speak to those forces and how should we as a planning commission try to strike a balance between them?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So a lot of the goals that you're referring to in the general plan were really kind of left over from the previous 2012 plan, and that was adopted before the balanced housing ordinance went into effect. That was about 2014 is when they did that ordinance. So you've got kind of a lot of those leftover goals to say, but when we were going through the general plan, we, kind of the state of things now and the economy and housing needs, we kind of felt it would probably be best to leave those in just as a placeholder until, or at least to maybe sort of guide policy as far as the balanced housing ordinance is concerned. So in other words, if we're considering new exceptions or things like that, then we can kind of use that as a guide.
And if I can add to what Mark just said, he's right. If you look at the old general plan that we're working on, back in 2012, there was a run on the bank. I mean, we had tons of multifamily apartment buildings coming through, and so that's why the council felt it was prudent to establish this ordinance. We're dealing with different dynamics now, to your point, Commissioner, and so whether it's in this general plan or an independent step, if the commission as a whole feels like we need to make some adjustments to any ordinance, you always have that purview to send a recommendation on to the council. Let me give you, for example, we talk about our moderate income housing, and I'm not saying that that townhomes are necessarily the panacea or the solution to that, but one of the things that has been kind of kicked around is maybe pulling townhomes out of the balanced housing ordinance. Right now, any attached housing, regardless, is considered multifamily. That's one example of something that if the commissioners wanted to talk about, we could perhaps at a different date. But dynamics needs the vision of the city is always changing, and so if you feel like you need to make a recommendation to the council via this general plan vehicle, you can do that, or you always have that ability, and that's one of your responsibilities as commissioners, is if you see changing things that, especially from a land use perspective, that the council should consider, we can help facilitate that. I don't know if that answers your question.
And I think something to add in there too is the thought of infrastructure or facilities, because a lot of times whatever plan is allowed, and especially if it involves any kind of zoning map or future land use map changes, then ultimately whatever you recommend and then the council approves might commit us to certain infrastructure which we don't have, so I mean, as it stands now, and it's been explained to me by Greg Davenport and others, we just can't build water tanks fast enough already. And if we committed ourselves to certain types of additional draw in our system, we definitely would be upside down at some point. So that's why I think even though came about before I was here with balanced housing, but from everything I've seen, without that being in place, I think we'd already be in a much worse position to be able to provide the services that people want, because that's the reasonable expectation, right? If somebody develops, and especially if somebody pulls a building permit, they expect that water is going to come out of the tap, the toilets will flush, and so forth. And we're at that breaking point right now where we can't always guarantee even what we've already zoned, let alone changing something on the zoning map to allow even more. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think we've got to be very, very careful with infrastructure.
And I've seen that in other cities, and that's a very, very good point. So
So Commissioner, is your question, do we need the balanced housing ordinance to direct land use? Are you saying, don't we have existing tools in the general plan and other portions of the code that would help steer growth?
I feel like my question is more, how can I best, and how can we as a commission best serve the city when we feel like we're being pulled in different directions
Okay.
by forces from within the city, with the balanced housing and then the general plan, and I don't know what the right answer is. You suggested, we could make changes, but I don't know what those changes should be. But I think it's something that we need to think about and have a more clear objective as to where the city needs to go.
Mr. Merchant,
If I may.
please.
I think that the general plan is great in the purpose of driving us to where we would like to be. And the ordinances are currently what we have, right? And so while currently we do have this Balanced Housing Act, I do think that our goals that we have in our general plan as they currently sit and as we've discussed in the Planning Commission are good goals. I think that we should be, I mean, I I work in the Housing and Community Development Division for the state of Utah. And so housing is our topic daily, right? And just today they were meeting with the governor and talking about the housing crisis here in Utah. And I think that any way that the city can responsibly help alleviate that crisis is one of our jobs as citizens, especially citizens that are sitting on a planning commission that can make a difference currently. What a great opportunity we have to help influence things and alleviate some of the pressures that are going on for citizens of Utah in not being able to find housing. And so I think that doing things like considering taking townhomes out of the balanced housing ordinance would be a good idea, especially where we do things that can help encourage home ownership, which if we could fold that somehow into the ordinance, whether it's townhomes or whether it is multifamily units, that we're encouraging those types of units and those types of builders and developers that are willing to sell those units, and not necessarily to investors, but to actual people who need homes here in Utah. Because right now, people can't buy a single family standalone starter home. They have to start in a condo or in a townhome. And so doing something to start so many people, because Utah is a really unique state where we have so many people that are coming up from the groundwork, young people who are born in the state, who want to stay in the state, not necessarily move-ins who are coming from different places with a ton of money, but people who are just wanting to start on that journey of home ownership and really break out of, a lot of times that's the only way they can break out of a poverty cycle. And so I think doing those things is one of our responsibilities as planning commission, as well as the city council members, and to help encourage that. And so I would recommend, and I don't know if we need a motion for this or if we need to wait until 6 o'clock for this, but I would recommend that we do make a motion to re-examine the balanced housing ordinance.
You can make a motion to put it on the agenda, but if it's not on the agenda, then
Okay.
it needs to be on an agenda before you can make a motion.
Sounds good. So I'll wait until 6 to make a motion to put it on the agenda for next time.
So I want to clearly understand, would you, like, in my mind, you got the Balanced Housing Act that is not really congruent or doesn't work with the general plan. Do we modify one or both, or how do we make them work together as one great whole?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, the general plan is where we want to be in 5-10 years, right? And so it's okay if our current ordinances don't match up with the general plan, because that's the vehicle we're using to steer our ordinances towards.
And so, dovetailing on what she is saying is that the goals in the general plan, if that's the vehicle that begins that public debate, that's really what it should be used for, is because, Commissioner Marchant made a good point, is that, the housing crisis needs to be solved responsibly. You don't build apartment complexes on every free corner because we have a housing crisis, because all that does is clog your roads further. As Duncan said, you have trouble servicing it with sewer and water and storm sewer. Quality of life goes down. And so I think that if the goals are sufficient in the general plan to spark a public debate, and what I mean by public debate is between the planning commission and city council, and in their public hearings, if they start to talk about that balanced housing and what it should be in 2022 rather than 2014, I think then the general plan is serving its purpose. I don't think it has to be a perfect goal. I think as long as it results in the vision that this planning commission is sending to the council, then I think the goal is sufficient.
I appreciate that. I feel like this discussion has brought more clarity to me in my mind. So that's very much appreciated.
The other thing that I would add is, how there's the criteria for each type of action you make, we talked about, and you guys forwarded to the council the kind of the updates to the criteria for a conditional use permit, right? And on an administrative process, one of your criteria was make sure it's consistent with the ordinance, right? But for the criteria that are for changing the city code or for changing the maps, the zoning or future land use map, most of the criteria focus on is it consistent with the general plan, right? And so that's what Larry's talking about. You update the general plan and then you make sure that starts the discussion, and then maybe somebody starts the process of a code amendment, and then we make sure it's consistent with the general plan. And I think that's one of the coolest things for you guys as part of this process. You collectively, the general plan committee, planning commission, then council, is that now this new general plan, once you've finalized the process, should be fresh in your minds. And then as you look at every subsequent code text amendment or map amendment, then as you're looking at those criteria and seeing if it's the type of thing you should be forwarding to the council, then you're weighing everything against that new general plan, right? Is it conditioned? Is it consistent with those goals, or should it be changed a little bit to be consistent? So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out. I mean, because I know a lot of times in the staff report, they've done an elaborate job, the staff has, of saying for each of these map amendments or code amendments, here's the criteria, and you don't know exactly what goal 2 or goal 6 is, and but now you do, right? Because you've gone through them. So anyway, just food for thought.
So does the general plan need to be officially approved before we can officially address balanced housing?
No, not necessarily. I mean, you're just looking at the current goals of the current general plan until it's formally adopted by the council, and then you start focusing, reviewing everything through the lens of the new general plan. So,
But it is a guideline, so. And kind of back to that, and we'll let you finish, Mark. Sorry for all the interruptions.
No, that was good discussion. I'm pretty much done, but just to finish up, some of the other exceptions are kind of tied to some of the overlay districts that we have. So the interchange overlay zone near the Mountain View corridor, and the residential overlay in some of the commercial centers. So again, it's really just kind of the intent there is to just kind of steer multifamily to areas where it makes sense.
And I think one of the exceptions and the reason you will be seeing multifamily built in West Jordan here and probably in the near future. I don't know what near is with this economy, but as the building continues, as developments like Wood Ranch and Jones Ranch are very large 100-acre developments. Well, there's an exception in the balanced housing that at 17% of the unit count can be multifamily developments. And I think Wood Ranch is even higher, about 50-50. And so, it's, if anyone tells you, well, you guys don't allow any multifamily in West Jordan, that's simply not true. But I think what Wood Ranch, Jones Ranch, the TODs, the IOZ are very, very thought out efforts about placing multifamily where the council feels, planning commission and council feels like it's most appropriate. And I think you go around Salt Lake County and there's a lot of big apartment buildings going up around, and I kind of look at that and I think, whoa, how's that going to work? But so I think it's very, very strategically thought out in West Jordan. So if anyone accuses you and say, well, you don't allow any, that's simply not true.
Well, and that's one of the things that I want to make a point too, is you got to have the infrastructure. And that's where that general plan and the infrastructure and all of these things kind of come together, because we could build 1 million homes, single family homes, and if we don't have the water and sewer for it, it doesn't make a difference. So, yeah. Okay. I was going to make a comment, but I won't. Okay, Mark.
All right, that's pretty much it. So I think does anyone have any other questions?
Were we gonna go through the map?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
yeah,
We're right
our
at-
meeting's
yeah.
gonna start in 4 minutes. So.
So why don't we take a 4-minute break and then we'll continue on and then we'll get into the maps and stuff.
One question I have: what kind of agenda item do you want to see on balanced housing? Did you want a complete reexamination of it? What that's
Now this is just me. This is not representing us. I would like to see more of maybe a scale down, but I mean, definitely the twin homes and some of the multi dwellings that are combined.
yeah. And so I'm not meaning what do you want in the balanced housing, just what kind of agenda. So it looks like you want a reexamination of
Just-
the ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to start opening a Pandora's box, so to speak, but maybe a little bit we can start at maybe ground level and kind of work our way to those, because I think that makes more sense, because again, if we don't have that infrastructure in place,
Absolutely.
it doesn't make sense, and I personally would not vote for anything that we don't have the infrastructure, and that's why even with some of these large single-family developments, I'm a little concerned about, and so that's not even just saying, the apartments and everything else. It's got to be a balance.
Maybe we could have somebody from Public Works come just to talk about the infrastructure we have in place versus like the infrastructure that would be, or like how much more our current infrastructure could support. And then maybe we could also have a comparison of what other cities are doing as well, what they do allow, because I do think that West Jordan is significantly more restrictive than other cities around us for multifamily units. So maybe we could just compare what some other cities are doing as well.
So how much density and significant? I don't like that word.
Just erase the word then.
Okay. So, all right.
I think the point is that we'll do our best to get you
Yeah.
good information so you can have a good discussion. I mean, for example, what would the ratio look like if we pulled townhomes out? Like presently do an inventory. It's going to take some time to do some of that research, but I think it'll be worth it to drive the discussion, and utilities is definitely one that we're going to have to look at. The thing is too, even if we were to, if the council decided to pull townhomes out of the cap and grade or balanced housing, it's not going to be a free for all. They still have the legislative authority and discretion to say, you know what, it doesn't work here. We'd have to look at existing zoning to see if the existing zoning would allow townhomes or attached product, but that's part of the research.
Could we also look and see if there has been, or if there's any way that we could add like a caveat that like there could be more, like we would lean towards like home ownership. So like developments that are more geared towards home ownership instead of like investor opportunities or developer owned properties.
Yep, we can look at it, but that becomes really difficult because if people have a lot of money, they spend it any way they want. And so, anyway, well, I think I've got enough in my mind to know what the agenda item needs to be. So,
Okay. It is now, well, we'll give it one more minute and then we'll. But yeah, we've come to that point. That's what happens when you get older.
Sounds like I missed a good conversation.
Yeah, we started a little early.
There are two roads completely, so I have to have two left turns.
Thanks.
And it's a good place. It's right there at the track station on 7800 South, so it's a good spot for it. It's just frustrating.
Okay, we'll go ahead and start the West Jordan Planning Commission meeting, November 1st, 2022. We'd like to excuse Commissioner Hatch and Commissioner Quinney. And first on the agenda is review of the minutes. Any questions or motions?
Julie, can I see the minutes on my computer? Well, I read them on hard copy, and there's a word in the very first paragraph that is, I think it's just a typo, but it could be material if some unwitting person read it.
So me, if I read it.
Yeah. Would confuse Ammon.
Yeah, do you want to look at the hard copy?
The last sentence of the first paragraph, he explained that projects that the city council has a master development agreement. Should that be will or with generally rise to the top? To me, it reads like it should, the word should be will, not with. Don't mean to nitpick, just.
All right, do we have a motion?
I motion to approve the minutes from October 18th, 2022.
And I'll go ahead and second that. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that carries 5-0. Next on the agenda is a continuation of what we've already started the discussion. So go ahead, Mark.
All right. Thank you. So just to kind of recap and show us where we're at, we finished all of the chapters for the general plan. So we're kind of getting into the end game here. So the last section we're going to be talking about is the future land use map. And so this is a little bit new in terms of chapters and organizations. And originally the future land use map was really just kind of a separate map and wasn't necessarily included in the general plan proper. But one thing we're planning on doing is actually including a new chapter, right, Duncan, for the actual land use map itself, just so it's a little more official and more accessible. So without further ado, I'll just get right into the map here. So you'll kind of remember that we discussed a lot of these changes at the work session we had a couple months ago with the city council. So I'm really not going to go over a whole lot of those, but what I really want to focus on tonight is more on the changes since the last meeting. So I'll just kind of just start east to west and kind of run through those really quick. So over here on Redwood Road, there's a property that's zoned SC1 commercial, and it's got, in the current map, it's kind of split between this community commercial designation and professional office. And so what we've done is just kind of gone in and cleaned that up and stretch that community commercial all the way to the north property line so that it's reflecting the zone district. So, any questions on that?
Is that the same piece of property that the city council talked about?
It's the one adjacent directly south.
Okay,
Yeah, so it's right next door.
so you're,
So it's an office complex is what's on there now.
so you're modifying that to SC1 to match the property north of it?
We're just modifying the future land use map. So we're modifying it to be completely community commercial instead of having it be split between professional office and
Okay.
community commercial.
this is 100% the future land map. None of these changes or suggestions will take effect immediately, right?
Right, yeah, so the future land use, this really kind of has the same effect as the general plan itself on zoning. It's really meant as a guide. And so if someone were to come in per se to rezone this, they would need to look at the future land use map and follow that as part of the findings. Okay. All right, if there's no more questions, I'll move on to the next one here. Let's see. So this is one we probably want to get some good feedback on. This was actually suggested by Councilmember Whitelock. So the property we're looking at is the Napa Ball Camp site just on the corner of 40th West and 90th South. So her suggestion was to consider looking at changing that to medium density residential to match the neighborhood further to the east. But we wanted to kind of bring that back in just in option form, really, to get your feedback on your thoughts on that. And so the two options are really just that: change it to medium density residential, or the second one is just leave it the way it is, community commercial. Right now it's zoned M1, which is an industrial zoning district, and right now it's just being used as a warehouse. So I guess the biggest question is what would be probably the highest and best use for
Could we
this area?
recommend
as
changing
future
it to
development goes.
commercial and not just leaving it? I mean, it says community commercial, but
Well, if we change the zoning district, it would make the existing use legal non-conforming. So there is kind of that
Okay.
consideration.
because I mean, if we're going to rechange that, I'm thinking with Smith's right across the street there, kind of continue that theme. But
Yeah, and keep in mind too, this would just change the future land use map.
correct, and I
So
understand that.
if someone were to come in and rezone that corner, they could do that to commercial.
Is there a reason we're looking at changing this? I mean, the ball camp's been there for a long time. Are they looking to move? What,
Beyond that, I didn't really get a reason other than that was just a suggestion by a
are we
council
trying to
member.
preempt something that may happen in the future? What's the purpose of even looking at this at all?
No, I don't think ball camp's going anywhere, and it's more than a warehouse. It's actually a distribution for ball camp and Napa Auto Parts, and so I think that it distributes a wide area of parts. And that's been there probably since 1973, 74. It's been
Yeah,
mid 70s.
I just don't see the purpose in,
Um,
in touching this.
Yeah,
Why mess with it?
I don't, particularly to medium density residential. That's right on a node. Commercial, in the general plan right now says that commercial development should be at nodes in West Jordan. So I think that I'm like you, I don't understand changing it to medium density residential.
I would be
To
in
me, it
favor of
doesn't
just
make any
leave this
sense
alone.
either land use wise or economic. I just don't ever see that occurring. So.
It seems like this should be, if it's a warehouse, it would be more like light industrial maybe and be moved out into that range.
I think it's fine leaving it community commercial because, but the zoning's not changing.
I
Yeah,
think it would
yeah.
definitely, I definitely think it should be some sort of commercial zone. I don't think it should be changed to residential.
I just leave it. That'd be my vote.
If ball camp did move out, could the zoning be changed at that point?
If I would suggest against that as a city because I think you take a lot of uses away when you change zoning. I think if the property owner suggested something different, then yes, it could be changed. So yes, it potentially could be rezoned. So
I'm not proposing anything at this point, but I
Yeah.
would note that for school bus drivers like myself and for semis that are in and out of ball camp a lot every day,
yeah,
it really would be nice for that little block to be something different.
Yeah.
Why?
It's just, the roads are too narrow, you can barely make a turn there. I see people running over the curb every day.
I've seen that.
Okay.
All right. Well, I appreciate your feedback. Thank you. All right. So moving on. Let's see. So going down here to Old Bingham Highway, this is the southernmost track station in the city. Right next to that is a regional power station. So under the current map, it's designated as light industrial, but we really don't see that changing. Being a regional power station, that's pretty much critical infrastructure. So the idea was just to move or extend that public facilities designation over and just to match what's there. Yeah, so UTA owns the light rail station, and then Rocky Mountain Power owns the power station. Or I think it's Pacificor, maybe. Yeah,
Whatever they call themselves now.
right. Okay. So, any comments on that one?
No.
Okay.
I'm fine with that one. Hey, Mark, sorry, could
Yeah.
we go back to the one that was up for debate about community commercial?
Sure.
There's one, yeah, right above it by in the purple, the light industrial zoning, and to the right.
Over here.
Yeah, the
Okay.
medium density residential to light industrial over to the right.
Oh, okay.
Yes, right there.
Gotcha.
That one, especially where it's right across from the TSOD, would it not make more sense if we changed that whole area to also match the TSOD?
Are you referring to the area north of the frontage road or
Yeah,
to the
the light
west of
industrial
Bangor?
right now.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of the development we've been seeing there has pretty much remained industrial. There is I believe there's a sound wall across here, so the access really isn't too great on that side. So it could make that a little difficult, and I believe that area is part of the TSOD, but it's kind of a combination TSOD with M1 zoning. So I don't know.
My suggestion would be after we get done with the city center and Gardner Station station area plans, one of the next station area plans could be to relook at this area. I would probably postpone that decision until that time. But that's just my suggestion.
What
So,
would that timeline look like?
it would probably be a couple of years out.
So if that's a couple years out, wouldn't we want to have the future land use map already kind of match it just so that
It already is in an overlay, the transit oriented district overlay. So that map is overlaid over the property.
over
Yeah, this whole industrial area. That was adopted in 2007.
so would it make sense for us to match the future land use map to that as well?
You could do that if you wanted.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just maybe one suggestion to match that.
Any other thoughts on that one? Okay. All right. So moving up to here to 5600 West and 7800 South. So this area here, you can kind of see in highlighted in blue. This is the future site of the Home Depot that's going in there, and so right now they're in the process of changing the zones, and they're on some pretty strict timelines to get that through. And so one of the recommendations was just to change that from mixed use, from its current designation of mixed use to community commercial, just to reflect that. future use. So just to clean that up. Then up here, this is a small piece of Copper Rim. So the main road going into Copper Rim just comes up through here. And then this is just kind of a piece in between that road and the power corridor. And so right now all of that's just simply open space. So the idea was to just change that to reflect open space. All right. And going up to this one, so on our current map, this is designated as a really large area of future park. Council has talked quite a bit about reducing this, especially with the new Maple Hills Park, just barely completed. They pretty much feel that that serves the park needs of the community, and so
What south is that on?
that is 7,400.
Does that road actually go under Mountain View there? That's, okay.
Yeah, it's planned to
That's
go
confusing
over.
me.
Yeah, it's planned to go over the Mountain View corridor and connect to the road in Copper Rim.
Okay.
But yeah, eventually.
So on that one, the recommendation is to change that from medium density to parks,
Right, that was
From park to
or from
medium.
parks to medium density.
right. Yeah, just to kind of reflect and kind of bleed into those two.
Where's the
two on the
Rosewood
side.
Park?
The
Rose.
You mean Ronwood?
Ronwood.
Oh,
That's further to the south. So
will you show me on the map?
Ronwood Park is this area here,
Gotcha.
and then the Maple Hills Park is right here.
Gotcha. Does this match with, or the county map of parks? Does it? Because I know that they have different qualifications as well of like who's overserved or who's underserved or what they need, like as far as rec centers and parks and open spaces go.
Yeah, and we actually have our own master plan, so that's the parks
That's the
parks
park.
master plan, and that usually goes into the levels of service. And
Do we have a surplus of open space?
well, we did that in 2019, but at that time, I don't think we did.
What do you mean by surplus?
If I'm when I last read the Salt Lake County's like park general plan thing, they had different qualifications and qualifiers for like how many people, like how much open space was needed per person basically. And so they said like, okay, the southwest quadrant of the county is underserved and the northwest quadrant of the county is overserved, basically that, or it's like sufficiently served. And so I am just very hesitant to give any open space away because once that open space is gone, we never get it back, you know? And so I would rather keep it as park, as open space, even if because we can always change it. It can be changed like we're doing right now, and it can be open for discussion, but once we give up that open space, we're never getting it back. And especially as we're planning the western development of West Jordan, this is open space that they'll never get back. I'm hesitant to let it go.
That's a fair point. Just for some context, I know that our public services department in Isaac Astill is working with the council office to do a heat map of all of the park infrastructure that we have for West Jordan, and they're digging into that, and it'll probably make its way into the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. But in addition to that, this particular property, we've had an active land use application since 2015 for housing, and Mark's right. The council is very aware of what the current future land use map reads, and if we owned it, that would be one thing. We don't, and it's under private ownership, and so the council has the duty and responsibility to put the resources where it would be most prudent. And I won't speak for the council, but from what I've seen, they're pooling and pushing most of their financial resources into Roundwood Park, that being the regional park for the west side of the city. Veterans Memorial is the regional park for the east side. And so your comments are great, and we should definitely consider that. This has got a lot of history to it, though, and it's hard to access. And so when they're trying to understand where their resources should be pooled, they got to look at access. And even though 7400 is eventually going to provide some better access across Mountain View Corridor, it's just it's challenging. So anyway,
You answered my question. I was wondering if the city owns that property.
no.
And if it is privately owned, how can we just tell a property owner they can never do anything with their property?
We'd have to pay fair market value for it.
Yeah.
And that brings up, then we have to maintain it and all this other stuff too, which I know we're struggling as to maintain the parks we have now, especially with all of the small parks we have. To me, it would make sense, especially if we don't own it, to
Is there a master development agreement for the area then, if there's an application in the works
It has not been approved.
because of the zoning?
No, there's a number of reasons. Infrastructure is the main reason why it hasn't moved forward. There's just no water and sewer available in that area as of right now.
Gotcha.
That will change in the coming 18 months. Mr. Harper is well aware of the constraints, and I'm sure they'll continue to push on that application, and
yes.
eventually it'll get to you.
So as soon as water
Yeah.
is available, you'll have your chance.
Okay. Well, then I would just either suggest to staff or recommend that we put it in the zoning map, at least keeping some portion of that as a park. It doesn't have to be a big park, just some portion, because the other park is pretty far south. And I know that for me, with my kid and my dog, it makes a difference I love the pocket parks. I love our small little parks that we have in some of our neighborhoods. I think they're great. So if we could make some portion of that a park for those future residents, I think it would be beneficial.
Well, isn't that something that would be included in the master development agreement anyway? Just having some open space?
we could, and that could be one of the things that when it's brought to us that we could look at, yeah, because especially if it's an HOA, this is one of the things I've noticed that the city has gone towards too, is if you have an HOA where they're willing to maintain the green space, that makes it a lot easier for the city because they don't have to maintain it. And that's still green space. And that's kind of, at least this is my own personal opinion, that's kind of the trade-offs we need to look at. And like we're saying, when we're looking at water and stuff like that, that's one of the things. And once we get those infrastructures in place, then we kind of can look at the master plan and say, okay, we can allow X amount of units with certain percentage of that, which is already required for those master development plans, green space. And like even the place right across the street that was developed, there's just a sliver of green space and even a dog park, which we kind of talked the developer and putting a dog park in there, but that's all maintained by an HOA. And they even allowed that dog park to be used by everybody in the whole neighborhood, whether you're part of that HOA or not. So anyway, so
And that concept plan does have a park feature in there. So, but it's more development related, probably for the residents there, than it will be regional. But it's still, there will be open space in there. So.
Thank you. I just want to make sure we preserve what we can.
I think it's worth pointing out too, the green just below that is a park, which is ballparking probably 20% of the developable space of the property that we're talking. So I think it's already represented.
All right, thanks. All right, so moving on. So this area here, this was a pretty large area that they were proposing some changes, but going back to the last work session, a lot of this discussion at that time was centered around this vacant piece here. And right now, under our current map, it's community commercial, but we haven't really seen a whole lot of economic viability at that location. So we were proposing to change that to match the density around it, which is medium density residential. But in addition to that, some of the comments from some of the council members were to reassess the existing density that was around it in the surrounding neighborhoods and to kind of match what was already there, because apparently they were seeing a lot of inconsistencies with what was shown on the future land use map and what was shown on, or what was actually built. So we've gone through that, recalculated those densities based on the current land use map and density tables in the general plan, and so these are the proposed changes. So it basically, in a nutshell, pretty much all the areas it just bumped the density up just at one designation. So low going to medium, medium going to high, that sort of thing.
So we're just changing it to reflect what's already there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of the kind of the history on that was that there were some last minute changes in the last general plan, and I wasn't actually involved in those, but apparently some of those were kind of altered a little bit, and so the density was a little bit different when these were being approved, such as the Highlands and the Oaks. So, any comments on that? Okay. All right, and then just the last change. This is a water tank just over on the corner of U111 and 7800 South. So right now there's two parcels there. One has a water tank and the other has a landscaped area that's a detention basin that serves this larger subdivision here. So this was requested by Greg Davenport, our public facilities director. He just suggested to move that public facilities to cover that detention pond, just because that was kind of a critical area for the city and wanted to make sure that was preserved. So that was that change. Any comments on that one? All right. Well, and that's pretty much it for the changes since the last work session. Are there any other last minute comments that you have or questions?
Commissioner Marchant.
Only one. Just along Redwood. I would love to see, I don't know if it would be possible, especially towards the more southern end of West Jordan. I would love to see more commercial development all along Redwood. I think that Redwood is a natural space for some of that more commercial development. And right now it looks like, sorry, if you can go up, right above that big red zone, there's just a blob of residential. And so I think it would be cool if we could get all of Redwood commercial. That's my only thought.
All right. Well, that pretty much concludes the future land use maps. Thanks for your comments, and we'll take these back and get them ready. So the next step for the next meeting, we're looking at, I believe, getting this ready for public hearing for the general plan as a whole. So we're just finishing up some last minute things. So once that's all finalized, we'll get it on the agenda and get it ready to go.
Okay, thanks for your hard work, Mark. You and Ray, I know, have put a lot of time and effort into this.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Wynn?
We talked earlier about adding an agenda item for, what did we call it?
Yeah,
Balanced housing.
I'll just add that onto the next agenda. Yeah.
Okay, I don't think you need an official procedural motion if staff's already got an understanding, so.
Okay. Any other comments? Any motions?
I think
Chair,
Scott has something.
Oh, I'm sorry, Scott.
I wanted you to wait until the mayor walked in. Oh, no.
Right now is now a good time.
Now's a good
No.
time.
I motion.
Oh, I was just kidding. I'm sorry. That was just an opportune moment. Chair, I did want to take, did want to take the opportunity, unless you've already done this, but to introduce our newest planner to the city of West Jordan, Megan Jensen. And we're super excited to have her a part of the team. And Larry or Megan, do you mind going up to the podium and introduce? I know that today's been a day of introductions. Maybe just give some background, your education, things like that.
Button on the right.
Yeah, so I'm Megan Jensen. I just graduated from the U in urban ecology, and I'm from Kaysville. Yeah, that's kind of my background, basically. So, yeah,
Well, welcome.
thank you.
Do you know Jordan Catcher?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, she was one of my professors. Yeah, she was good.
So one of the things that Megan's going to help us with is a lot of the building permits, the business licensing, and things like that. In time, though, the commission will likely see her at this meeting and presenting items, and so this will, Mark's not one to get too excited. But this will really free up his capacity to work on other items, and so this, having Megan part of our team really helps us be more proactive in the way we deal with land use instead of just reactive. And so we're just super glad that she's here and part of the team. And if you think of any questions, yeah, fire away. That's no.
Who's going to win Saturday? You're not a football fan, are you? Well,
Utah.
we won't hold that
Utah.
against you. Go Utes.
Scrub that from the record.
Yes, I am biased. I went to the U too. Who are they? Oh. They're playing Arizona.
Good answer.
Okay. Now, do I have any motions?
I motion to adjourn.
Second?
Yes, please.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. We are now adjourned.
You really drew that one out.
Recording stopped.